University of Minnesota's Board of Regents. And starting off with approval of the minutes from our September 2017 meeting, would entertain a motion to approve those.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion or corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the minutes? Aye.
Aye.
Very good. That carries, and that takes us to our second item of business. President Kaler.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. You all know that we toss around a lot of adjectives to describe our university, and we use them freely and even casually. We're global, highly ranked, open-minded, diverse. We support equity and diversity efforts. We're empathetic. We believe in partnerships to advance our mission and help the state. We face tough issues head-on, and we talk about ourselves a lot. But in my 6.5 years as president, I can't remember a month in which those adjectives came to life as clearly and tangibly as they did over the past 4 weeks since we last met in September. We weren't just telling our story, we were showing it. For example, on a Saturday last month, I helped bestow an honorary degree on the President of Finland, partly assisted by the 100% Norwegian Regent Johnson. We are, here's a funny story I'll tell you offline. We are, after all, the university with the finest and largest Finnish cultural and language program in the nation, and hundreds of Finns awoke early on a Saturday to gather at Orchestra Hall to see our university honor their president and to sing the Rouser. Immediately after that event, I hopped in my car and went off to a conference of Somali American leaders from across the nation meeting in our law school to exchange ideas on youth development in their communities. That symposium was held on our campus because of our strong ties with our Somali neighbors and the excellent work of our extension educators in 4-H. You heard a little bit about that yesterday. Global yes and local yes, and a convener to tackle grand challenges yes again. Our story is also told in the activism of our students and their diversity. I was visited during my regular office hours a few weeks ago by student Yongchun Jung. He's one of about 30 students that we know of on our Twin Cities campus who have been adversely affected by the government's decision to cancel the military accessions vital to the National Interest Program, or MAVNI. Because of this canceled program, some of our students face deportation. Who are they? They are our international students with valid visas who were recruited into the U.S. military specifically for their medical credentials or their language skills. They signed enlistment contracts in exchange for obtaining U.S. citizenship. However, those contracts are now being canceled or delayed. To seek resolution, Yongchun has established a new student group, the MAVNI Advisory Committee, to help support and connect students and alumni enlisted in the program and affected by this change. I applaud him and his colleagues for taking an unfortunate situation and trying to help others affected just like him. His predicament is one I've learned of this month, but such challenges are what our community faces and tackles every day. Let's take last weekend. Our story was told in who we celebrated, how we teach, and the range of our reach. Last Saturday, our School of Social Work, the oldest social work school among any public university in the nation, celebrated its 100th anniversary. It's been a century of addressing some of the state and nation's most pressing problems, an event that attracted an all-star team of current and former members of Congress. It was this university bringing together a wide spectrum of people from all political views, and it was a Humphrey School playing its role. Earlier this week, I met with leaders of our American Indian nations to discuss the university's role in wild rights research. And along the way, in the same month, we told our story in print as I partnered with the president of the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce, sharing our joint position that the elimination of deferred action for childhood arrivals, or DACA. I partnered with the president of the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce, sharing our joint position that the elimination of deferred action for childhood arrivals, or DACA, could hurt Minnesota's economy, our workforce, and close access to education. Also this month, it was demonstrated that our commitment to minority hiring isn't just talk, it's action. And that's why, thanks to this board and the good work of our Office of Business and Community Development, we were recently named the Corporation of the Year by the North Central Minority Supplier Development Council. Because of this board's long-standing supplier diversity program, we saw an $11.2 million increase over the past year in the use of businesses owned by women, minorities, and disabled suppliers, with a total spend of $82 million on businesses with those companies. And from afar, others told our story for us. The prestigious Shanghai rankings, also known as the Academic Ranking of World Universities, was released, and lo and behold, it wasn't just our adjectives bragging about us. It was those of an independent international organization. The University of Minnesota's education program and the College of Education and Human Development ranks number 3 in the world, according to this respected assessment, with only Harvard and Stanford above us. Makes CEHD the highest ranked public education program in the world. Our medical school was ranked 25th, 9th among U.S. publics, and our social sciences 14th, 3rd among U.S. publics. Those are pretty good numbers, and that happened even as more locally we're celebrating key moments in our university system, with the inauguration of Chancellor Michelle Baer at Morris on a simply beautiful day in Stevens County, even as we launched our search for a new chancellor in our Rochester campus. We also celebrated at Northrop a wonderful evening with our closest friends and donors, about 450 of them, as we launched in a spectacular way our capital and philanthropic campaign called Driven. So I guess my report to you this month, Mr. Chair, is that yes, we do a lot of talking at our university. We love to talk. It's in the nature of academics. But under close examination, we don't just talk about what we do or what we can do. We just do it. And of course, as with all things, we can always do better. But for me, this month, we truly lived our story as a university. We showed what we do and all we can be proud of. And with that, Mr. Chair, I conclude my report.
Thank you, President Kaler. There is much to be proud of, and we all appreciate that that drive-through of the range and scope of activities that you and your team are engaged in. Where to start with my report? Let's see. Did anybody happen to notice a hockey game played at Amsoil Arena last Friday night?
I did.
Thank you, Chancellor Black. In case you missed it, that game did take place, and I will move on. You note that in my first report in July, I said that each month I would make a specific point of trying to highlight some or all, in some cases, of the priorities that we established at our July retreat in concert with the administration, and I think it's important that we do that so that you know we are constantly focused on those top priorities. Meetings yesterday, we discussed several items that directly tie to those, and I'm just going to pull a couple up for example here. In mission fulfillment, diversity and inclusion item, our priority to drive impact to the university's land-grant mission through its access, inclusion, and student success was a primary topic. In audit and compliance, yesterday we had a significant discussion of the university's risk profile, which relates directly to our priority to preserve and enhance the university's academic excellence and reputation. Today, you'll see us focusing on our system-wide strategic plan, which is a critical element of those priorities as well. Like President Kaler, we've been busy too, supporting President Kaler in the university. I'll highlight just a couple things, just by way of example here. Regents Beeson, Shu, Omari, and I, along with President Kaler, were up for the inauguration of Chancellor Michelle Baer. I see the Chancellor in the audience. Congratulations again. As you took on the 6th Chancellor of UMM. It was a great day in western Minnesota. Regent Anderson's made 2 trips to Crookston, and one for a Sparks event and one for their homecoming weekend kickoff alumni awards celebration. That's a long haul even for our 7th District Regent, and we're grateful. And President Kaler already referenced, and I'm anxious to hear the side story on Regent Johnson's conferral of an honorary degree on President Niinistö of Finland, so we'll catch that offline. We've also been deeply engaged in another of our strategic priorities, and that is the ongoing conversations about the future of academic medicine at the university, and I'm going to quickly provide an update of that work. At our May meeting, we approved a resolution that directed President Kaler and his administration to serve notice of non-renewal on the university's mHealth partnership with Fairview Health Services and UMP. That resolution called upon Fairview to negotiate regarding new terms so that we would be in a position to commit to a continuation of the mHealth relationship beyond its current term. The resolution at that time anticipated we would formally consider a new agreement at today's meeting. While the university, UMP, and Fairview have made significant progress since May, negotiations have not reached a point where we can act on a new agreement. President Kaler has delivered a letter to Fairview reaffirming the notice of non-renewal, which I endorse on behalf of the board today, and I want to state again what the priority is for the board and for the university, and that is this: achieving the vision for an integrated academic medical enterprise is and remains one of our highest priorities, and we look forward to continued sustained progress in those discussions with our partners at Fairview, our partners at UMP, in the weeks and months to come. So I want to close that on an upbeat note. We're not where we'd hope to be, but we are making progress. With that, I close my report, and moving on our agenda, note and receive the items for filing, including the report, the excellent report of the Office of General Counsel, and on to our consent report. Is there a motion to approve the items in the consent report?
So moved.
Thank
Second.
you. Any discussion on what's in the consent report? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. That carries as well. And now on to one of those strategic priorities, the work of the system-wide strategic plan, and back to you, President Kaler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have a slide deck. Jay will get up for us here. Thank you, sir. So today, Mr. Chair, we'd like to turn to the, I hope you don't get my cough.
No.
Turn to the second step in our year-long conversation and decision-making on the system-wide strategic plan. And today, we're going to provide a level set, and that is get everyone up to speed on all that we've already done system-wide, and then talk about where we're heading. This is a work in progress, so I think getting calibrated on where we are now is important. We'll point out some of the intersections between the various strategic plans that have already been completed. And since we launched this phase of the effort last month, I've charged 5 senior leaders with tasks in focus areas, and they monitor the key elements of our missions. They are teaching and learning, medicine and health, research and discovery, outreach and public service, and then supporting our mission, or more specifically, how can we pay for this? How does our biennial budget request reflect the priorities that emerge from our other 4 focus areas? So here's what I want to share with you today. I want to review where we stand with strategic plans across the system. I want to identify the myriad themes that intersect in just about all of the plans, and I'll detail the work to be done and who we will consult with, and I'll reiterate the timetable we discussed last month. First, let's start with all the work last academic year that resulted in this framework. That's the extensive work that former Chancellor Lemkuhl and Vice Provost Roper-Hillman conducted so well. And from that months-long investigation, listening, and documentation, they offered 5 salient observations. They identified high-impact changes we should consider. They saw how a system-wide strategic plan will advance our land-grant mission. They showed how connections between our 5 campuses can be leveraged for excellence. And they attempted to clarify the roles of those in system-wide responsibility, which is something we need to do. The fact is, even before Stephen and Rebecca completed their framework, our system campuses and other critical units have completed their own strategic plans that lay the groundwork for where we're headed come 2018. So let me quickly move through all that's been done and that we can build on. And I know going forward, as our campuses and units further develop their plans and visions, they will always be keeping a system-wide perspective in mind. This is indeed a reciprocal process as we all examine the strategies that make each of our campuses and units excellent, as we all work to make a stronger and more connected system. So let's start in the Northwest. Let's start with Crookston. I think we all know the key strengths of our Crookston campus, which includes its high-quality online offerings. Again, you reviewed some of those yesterday. UMC is continuously keeping its strategic priorities fresh and is undergoing that process right now under the new Chancellor, Mary Holtz-Claus, who is very mindful of the energy around the system-wide effort. UMD is critical to the economic and cultural vitality of Northeast Minnesota with high-impact research. Right now, Chancellor Black and his team are completing a strategic planning process that began last year. It's the first such effort since 2011 and will include system-wide thinking as they finish their work. At Morris, where diversity and sustainability are part of its tradition, a new effort for a strategic plan is underway with, again, a new chancellor. I was in Morris together with several of you for Chancellor Baer's inauguration, and I know she told us she's just beginning the visioning process and anticipates the entire effort to take about 18 months. And Morris will benefit greatly from the system-wide work we're doing and will help to embed the Morris plan in what we develop here. In Rochester, health sciences are the focus, and the team there, under interim Chancellor Carroll, is in its third and final year and now adding goals to the strategic priorities, again with the system in mind. On the Twin Cities campus, we're broad and we're deep. That was reflected in our Driving Tomorrow strategic plan that you approved about 3 years ago, and it's been successful. We're now offering about 14 interdisciplinary, intercollegiate Grand Challenges undergraduate courses every academic year, and more than 500 students are enrolled in those classes. We have a goal of 2,000 students enrolled each year in such innovative Grand Challenges classes. Let me tell you, by way of color, about one that's simply fascinating and that demonstrates the power of interdisciplinary teaching and learning and its value to our students. The course I'm focused on is called The Human Experience of Sensory Loss, Seeking Equitable and Effective Solutions. It's team taught by faculty members from psychology, from speech, language, and hearing sciences, and from our medical school. 2 of the professors are distinguished McKnight professors, and it focuses on how our sensory pathways convey and receive information and how those people in our community with sensory deficits live their lives. And it looks at it from every possible angle, scientific, social, and from public policy. I'd kind of like to take this course. Such an approach could be activated on all of our campuses, and as you know, our Study Away program allows students to take classes at any one of our campuses. Grand Challenges research has also been a success. It's been recognized nationally as other respected institutions and organizations, including UCLA and APLU, have asked us to detail what we're doing and how we're doing it. And very soon, Executive Vice President and Provost Hanson will be announcing another round of Grand Challenge research grants. So far, 29 interdisciplinary projects have been funded with an investment from the university of about $3.5 million. Those projects emerged from about 100 proposals offered by hundreds of faculty and staff. And I know that some of our research leaders, including Vice President Levine, demonstrated yesterday the interdisciplinary work between the humanities, sciences, and arts at the Mission Fulfillment Committee meeting. The sorts of things our researchers are tackling in part of the Grand Challenges Research Initiative range from pursuing the Minnesota Precision Medicine Collaborative to intense exploration of which social programs are most effective in closing the various opportunity gaps for young people across the state. This is a critical problem. And ways to increase year-round food production in Minnesota. And as you can see, and the researchers pointed out yesterday, all of these have broad and deep statewide impact. Meanwhile, some system-wide offices have undergone their own strategic planning processes. Units such as our Office for Research, our libraries, our Office of Public Engagement, and Graduate Education have done so. My point is this: we have already done a tremendous amount of work that we can build on over the next months, a lot of work. So we don't need to reinvent the proverbial wheel. The material, the priorities, and the spirit exist for us to bring together all we do into one coherent system-wide plan that we all desire to have. The intersections are apparent. In fact, all of the campus plans as they're being developed and all of the different unit plans are not independent, and they fit into a system-wide vision. We know it's possible to create this plan because a couple of dozen themes run through just about every plan we've developed over the handful of years. There are many intersections. This is called a word cloud. We analyze common themes among all the system-wide work that preceded this current efforts, and these intersections emerged. And when this word cloud bursts, it will bear some strategic fruit and will likely pare down to a few key themes that connect all of our plans. They will guide us as we reach a final system-wide vision. Let me just focus for a minute on a few of the dominant themes that emerged. Clearly, research is one of them. It's a common theme, it's a priority across the system. All of the work to this point seems to rally around the concept of grand challenges. There's a desire to invest in our research infrastructure and in our faculty, and there's a great appetite for interdisciplinary and collaborative partnerships. Community also rises to the top of the themes, and that reflects our outreach and public engagement effort. What that could mean going forward is more courses with students being engaged with communities. It could mean more public and private partnerships that strengthen our university and our communities, and it could mean seeking ways to diversify and strengthen Minnesota's workforce. And then there's inclusion, the upper right. Just about all of our current strategic plans emphasize the need to have a more inclusive enrollment management approach, to nurture a more welcoming campus climate, and to promote the well-being of our employees. Those are words we use all the time, and they bind our system together. But this word cloud gives us all a sense of what connects us in many ways. So let me turn now to how we're going to take all that we know and all that we are still working on locally and bring it together with system-wide consciousness. So let me spend a few slides showing how we're moving forward. As I told you last month, I've charged 5 senior leaders to lead 5 focus areas. Executive Vice President and Provost Karen Hansen, our Chief Academic Officer, will lead the teaching and learning focus areas. Among the items I want her to explore is improving access and retention of students and complete a system-wide framework for online learning. In her work, I'm hoping that she and the other leaders will consult widely with stakeholders and others in the higher ed marketplace, and certainly with students. Medicine and health, key to all we do as a university, is the next focus area. We will address the key priority for the board and me, that is developing a plan towards an academic health system. We have opportunities in interdisciplinary and interprofessional education that will be a topic for exploration. This work will be consultative and exhaustive. We are the state's only comprehensive research university, and we need to explore research talent recruitment and retention system-wide. That's the charge to Vice President Levine. While we're already doing a lot when it comes to tech transfer and economic development partnerships, we need to examine our regional and statewide impact more closely. And Dr. Levine will need to have conversations with many stakeholders who drive our research enterprise and make it one of the best in the nation. I understand the slides are moving quickly, but it is in your docket material too. Outreach and public service is how we show our face to the community, the state, the nation, and the world. I'm asking Vice President Kramer to lead this focus area and assess, among other things, how we engage with key economic sectors in the state, such as agriculture, medical technology, and water. Vice President Kramer's tent of consultation will be large, and it will include the governor, our extension leader, legislative leaders, and educators. And then there's the supporting the mission focus area, led by Senior Vice President Brian Burnett. And in some ways, Brian's work won't be done until we all see what priorities emerge from the work of our other 4 focus areas. In the end, Brian, along with the other focus area leaders, will lead the conversations we'll have to have next spring and summer about how to develop our budget lines that are in sync with our new system-wide strategic priorities. And this will again require deep and broad consultation. So that's where we stand. That's the level set, and there's lots of work to do. Our leaders need time to dive into their charges, reach out to those whose input is critical in their decision making. And then come February, we'll bring to you reports and analysis of where we stand in the focus areas. And the rubber will meet the road come September when I present to you for your review our 2018-19 biennial budget request, and we'll need your approval in October. And it will develop, and we will show you a new approach, a more coherent system-wide approach to that budget. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll conclude my report and open this for conversation and your input. Thank you.
Thank you, President Kaler. And before I open this up for conversation and call on a couple of people. I want to recognize, in addition to President Kaler's effort here, his Chief of Staff, John Stedland, our Vice Chair, Regent Powell, and Regent Rocha, who are kind of taking the point for the board as a whole in terms of a steady diet of consultation with Mr. Stedland and with President Kaler and the rest of the team. So we're grateful for that. And then, of course, Mr. Steves and the entire board office. It's a big undertaking, and it's one that we treat very, very importantly. So I'm going to see if Regent Rocha or Regent Powell would want to open with some comments here and then get the rest of the board engaged. Regent Powell?
Well, thank you, Chair McMillan, and thank you, President Kaler, for the update on the process. And I think we're encouraged by the way it's been framed up, and the responsiveness of you and your team. And I think we're enjoying the conversations that we're having on how to move this forward. So you just went through a lot of material.
I did
pretty fast. So I'll give you, just a couple of comments. I appreciate the structure and the framework that you've elaborated on a little further. I think that as we move forward, into the real heart of the process, it will be very helpful as we work our way through each of the segments that there's some sort of structure set up around the background and the context, so that for each of the areas we have a sense for the current, our current status, the external context, our strategic aspirations. I mean, if you will, the data context. And I think we talked a lot about that yesterday in a couple of our review sessions. It's really helpful just if we can start with the level set of how we doing. How do we see the threats out there? What really are the big opportunities? I know there's a lot of good peer data, and you guys have been good about bringing that into the conversation. So I think that to the degree that we can bring just a consistent kind of dashboard approach to that kind of level set, it will be extremely helpful.
President Kaler?
Mr. Chair, excuse me, Regent Powell, that's a very good observation, and in fact, as I'm thinking about what I will bring to the board in December, because I've pledged to bring you an update at each of our meetings, we'll have a lot of stuff going on, but not yet complete during December. But I think what would be useful for me to share with you then is that level setting data, and I can show you data. We have a lot of stuff that benchmarks where we are. Who are our peers? Who are our aspirational peers? What are the directionality that I see higher education going in general? We can talk about the cost issues, but also about the opportunities that are there. So I think that can be the fodder of a very robust conversation in December.
Chair McMillan? Yeah.
Yes.
I think that will be tremendously helpful, and it will just assist the board then in putting into context the strategic, aspiration and initiatives that your team is going to put before us. So I think the board will very much appreciate that work.
Thank you. Regent Rocha, anything you want to add before we take questions and other comments?
You bet. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this, and absolutely associating with Regent Powell's comments, there's obviously only so much we can present in this time frame and in this format, and I think that was pretty clear in our conversations that we are looking at this database, and so base of data is probably the better way to say it. I want to, and this is in addition to this. This is not a critique of what we have, because I think it's really phenomenal where we're heading right now, the process, and I certainly invite all the board members. We've had these conversations, but I certainly don't see this as being something that is isolated to just a couple of us, and want all members involved in the process of having this comprehensive set of players, of folks that are providing input, which is just, like I said, tremendous. I just want to make sure that the board stays in this conversation, throughout. In fact, Mr. Chair, in the past, I've observed success in this process with essentially even a board retreat that is focused solely on what is really the most important thing that we will put in place for the institution. So at some point next year, when we have a sense of a formed approach, that would be something that maybe we as a board then can sit and have a really robust conversation to make sure all the elements that we're concerned about will be included in this. But in terms of the direction and the structure of what we've got going, I'm very happy with what's been developed by the administration. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Thoughts, comments, questions from the rest of our board? Regent Simmons.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Thank you for the presentation. As we look at the system strategic planning, to me one sort of big question is the overall vision. And is our vision that we are serving the state of Minnesota collectively, so each has its part, or to what extent does each part serve the state of Minnesota? And it really comes to a head for me when I look at the slide on Rochester strengths. And listed among the strengths for Rochester is, number one, academic focus of health sciences fits workforce demands of Southeast Minnesota. Now, do we want that to say Southeast Minnesota, or do we want that to say Minnesota? So in other words, is this a regional school serving a regional interest, or is it serving the state more broadly?
President Kaler.
Thank you, Chairman McMillan, Regent Simmons. That is precisely the kind of question that we need to ask and answer. So, southeastern Minnesota, television cameras are here, but I'll say it anyways, is a code word for Mayo. And we've got a great partnership with Mayo there. But obviously, we have the opportunity to provide a skilled workforce in healthcare for Minnesota and for the United States and the world. So, do we want to build on that great collaboration we had with Mayo to be more impactful going forward? I think the answer to that is yes. And this process should let us sharpen that focus and identify again what resources we would need to align against that ambition and a time frame over which we could achieve it.
Follow-up, Regent Simmons.
That's precisely what I would think is important to do, because I hope that the vision is serving the state and not just serving the region a campus is in. It'll be differential, but still. And it would make a difference in the strategic planning as a system if the vision were to serve the state, because then there might be a relationship with the medical school in Duluth and the University of Minnesota in Rochester that otherwise there wouldn't be encouragement for.
Right. Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, follow up, President Kaler.
And I thank you, Chair McMillan and Regent Simmons, and I'm sensitive to the time, but it's just timely to have this conversation because in play is nursing. Okay, so we have a great nursing program on the Twin Cities campus. What would it take, and is it appropriate to expand and build that capacity in Rochester as well? And again, how do we play in the larger health sciences portfolio with the Duluth Medical School, with the Twin Cities, with the pre-med objectives that students at Crookston and Morris might also have? I mean, this is good conversation.
Great example of an element of the strategy that needs to get asked and answered. As President Kaler said, I would pull up one element of that string of that conversation, and that is one of the things that the board and the university need from this is a way to make resource allocation decisions. And one of the great things a good strategic plan can do is help you take scarce resources and allocate them to a limitless number of needs. And that's one of the things the board talked about at the retreat when we worked on this, and I'm glad to hear that, just the little vignette you just gave us, President Kaler, there's a resource allocation decision and it has to be made as part of a strategic priority setting process. So I'm going to keep us going here. We've got some time, and this is really important stuff, so I don't want to sound rushed here, but Regent Swigum, I think you're next.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And at the expense of offending my friend Regent Simmons. Southeast Minnesota is more than Mayo.
I know.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure that we were.
I didn't say it.
That's me.
If I could, and let me give you a great compliment. First of all, Mr. President, this is the strategic planning we need to be doing, we ought to be doing, and I cannot compliment you more. In a former life, we would always have great initiatives and great policies, but they would somewhat be hampered by the resources that were available to address those initiatives or policies. It could make any difference what area it was in, healthcare, education, corrections, whatever. Are we somewhat, as this comes together, and I'm not sure how it comes together next year, you have the 5 different organizations, the last one being Mr. Burnett, who the Senior Vice President has to find a way to fund these initiatives. Will they be coming forward with, and I'm not even sure how this happens, are there going to be different levels of initiatives that come forward, different levels to accomplish the mission, great missions, but to accomplish them, we're going to probably need some resources. Are they going to come at different levels of what we can do with the monies we have available? I'm maybe not making myself clear, but resources do constrict us somewhat.
President Kaler.
Chair McMillan, Regents Figum, we are a resource-constrained institution. That's certainly true. Let me just say a couple of things about that. First, again, while we haven't had the formalized strategic plan that we need, if you look at our budget requests to the state over the past 6 years that I'm aware of, they do reflect the strategic priorities of the institution. They reflected a need to freeze undergraduate Minnesota resident tuition, which we did for 2 years with collaboration from the state. Last year, it was very clear as you went down the MnDrive initiatives for a clinical trials set in Minnesota, a request for money to freeze tuition, et cetera. It reflects those priorities. So what this exercise will do is let us in a more transparent way and in a more collaborative way, and frankly in a way that will let the board have more impact into what those priorities will be, will generate that kind of request of the state. Point number 2, and in my president's report, I actually should have given a shout out to Senior Vice President Burnett, because he hosted the first ever Finance Academy at the University of Minnesota a couple of weeks ago, and had over 100 financial administrators from across the system for a day-long activity to really talk about how we sharpen our tools with which we manage the budget. Because the fact of the matter is, it's unlikely that we are going to be able to raise in-state tuition at much more than an inflationary rate. I don't want to do that. I don't think the board wants to do that. It's unlikely the federal government is going to open its monetary tap and give us a ton more money. It's certainly not for indirect costs. I think we're looking at a situation where the state will likely be constrained in what it can do, even if it wants to, and we will never give that up. And we have a strong philanthropy effort, but it's not going to generate the kind of money that will make transformative differences across the board. In certain areas it will, but not across the board. And so I've just named for you the 4 sources of money that we have. So if we now want to embark on new initiatives, smart strategic things that are important for the state of Minnesota and for this institution, we're going to have to find the money to do it ourselves. And so we need to continue to be better stewards, smarter users of the resource that we have. And Vice President Burnett is extraordinarily well equipped to lead that effort across the institution. So that's where the bulk of these resources are going to come. But the strategic plan will also influence both the philanthropic message and the state ask. So I hope that responds to your question.
It does. Just so you understand, the strategic mission, as important as it will have some constraints when it comes to that last committee of Mr. Burton's.
Indeed.
Before I go to a couple other regents here, Regent Rocha, did you have a point on the allocation and the interface of the plan with resource allocation?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair and Regent Swigum. That's a great question because it sets up the importance of this effort. Because I see it really in two ways. One is, this doesn't drive the revenue or the resources available. This demonstrates our priorities with the resources that we have. And while there have always been priorities, this is just a greater articulation and an effort to get input from a lot of sources. So it helps us decide when, and at some point we're going to know what those resources are on an annual basis and then have to make a decision against those priorities that have been established by this plan. The other advantage is what President Kaler touched on. When you look at how the balance between the state colleges and the university have shifted the last couple of years, this is the sort of document that we can take to the legislature and demonstrate, look, this is why we need this funding, because we are, going to do these things for this state. And so it's really a critical tool. And again, when the university made the transition off of the open enrollment where any Minnesota high school student was admitted to a more restrictive enrollment environment, that strategic plan in agreement with the state was necessary, because if the money had followed the students, we never could have made the quality improvements that we made at that point. So this will be a state document. I mean, it'll be valuable to everybody. But your question on the resource side is really apt, because it will drive how we dedicate those funds, and it will also assist us in demonstrating why we need them from other sources, especially from the state.
Thank you. Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was adding to Regents Swigum and Rocha that this all has to show up in the long-term financial plan too. So those resource targets have to hang together with a viable long-term financial plan, which we see annually. I did want to go back to the comment, and maybe addressing this to Regent Powell or the President, in terms of what can we expect to see in this data set and the dashboard, the start point in December. Not quite clear in my own mind what that looks like. That sort of current level of investment or characteristics of each campus, or what do you vision that to look like at this point?
President Kaler.
Sure. Chair McMillan, Regent Beeson. I predict that my presentation in December will be Regent Shu's happiest moment on the board. Because I'm going to give you a data, it'll be a curated data deluge, but it will be a lot. I mean, I'm going to talk about where we are in the research space, where we can be more competitive, where we maybe are over-investing. I'll talk about the balance of external and internal resources around research. I'm going to talk about where we are in the competitive landscape with respect to out-of-state student recruitment. I'm going to talk about where we are in the landscape with respect to graduate and professional student recruitment and metrics. I'm going to talk about where we are in outreach and what resources are laid into our public service efforts, which is considerable. And there are going to be a lot of numbers, and we'll have a great conversation about that. But I think that's a logical next step to inform the board as we continue to move.
Will we need to dig a new level of the Anderson Library for the Shu repository?
Chair McMillan, I suspect that won't be necessary because it'll all be digital, but there will be a lot. And we'll of course continue to talk with the chair and with Regents Powell and Rocha as we shape that up. But I think that'll be good.
Very good. Regent Omari.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. I'm excited to see all that data. I hope that's recorded in the minutes so that we can hold that to the President in December. And that'll be good to inform the committee work as well, right? So as we think about the committees and some of the data that we were supposed to get yesterday and that we've been asking for, these things should have some synergy in there, so that's good. I'm really excited and like to see the consultation slide, seeing who will be involved in the process as we think kind of horizontally as well as vertically with the different stakeholders and important stakeholders. I think this is implicit, but also important enough just to mention, particularly within teaching and learning, but across the different facets and charge groups, if you will, and leaders of those groups. But particularly in teaching and learning, is to make sure that we're talking to student affairs, the experts in much of what we mean when we say learning and the different ways that we learn at the institution. Obviously, I'd love to see students in there as a stakeholder that will be in consultation with. But again, this might be implicit, but I just want to, for the record, put out there the importance of having that conversation with student affairs, who obviously report to the provost as well. But thank you.
Thank you, Regent Omari. Regent Cohen.
Thanks, Chair McMillan. I think this is really great work, so I commend you on it. I'm usually not a big fan, actually, of strategic plans because sometimes I think they get shoved away and not utilized, but it looks as though this one is on the road to something that will be useful. I really like the 5 categories. What I hope for, and you just answered that, President Kaler, one of the things I hope for is that we have really strong data about where we are now. And then I liked what you said, Regent Powell, in terms of there will be the strategic plan, but our strategic aspirations, where are we really hoping to go? What's important for us? We probably won't have the money to go right away, but at least we know what we're looking toward. And so that's one of the things I'm really looking forward to.
Very good. Any other thoughts? Comments, questions here? Thank you, President Kaler, and I've already identified some of the people in the organization worthy of calling out, but this is a big undertaking, and I also close by saying this is an entire board engagement. We just have a couple people at the interface point, and we will probably get to a midterm strategic or retreat of some sort, and I can envision this being our top priority there, or one of our top priorities. So, all right, we'll move to item 7 on our agenda for the day, and that is the Board of Regents policy on sexual harassment, sexual assault, stalking, and relationship violence. This is for action today, and we'll invite to the table Tina Marisam, the EOAA Director and our Title IX Coordinator, along with Brian Slavitt, our Deputy General Counsel, who will walk us through proposed amendments to 3 documents, and most importantly the Board of Regents policy on those topics I just referenced. We've discussed the policy and reviewed some of the changes at our June meeting. There's more changes since then. Our presenters and many others have spent a lot of hours since that time incorporating those changes and getting a robust level of feedback from the board and from other communities as we go forward. So what when we're done with the presentation, I invite lots of interaction with them, and then we have a process going forward here by which we would look to approve, if it's the board's will, the actual Board of Regents policy and the corresponding changes in the Student Conduct Code, but not move forward with the administrative policy until December, and highlight a couple elements of the Board of Regents policy and the corresponding pieces of the Student Conduct Code that we'd ask the administration for more opportunity. The entire process here would culminate in implementation of new policies and procedures January 1, 2018. So I don't think we're rushing anything here. It's big, important stuff, and we want to make sure we get it right. So Mrs. Marisam and Mr. Slavitt, please proceed.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Good morning, Regents, President Kaler. During the June board meeting, Deputy General Counsel Slavitt and I presented drafts of board and administrative policies on sexual misconduct. We're here today to further discuss and also to seek board action on these policies. Here's an overview of our brief presentation. I will start by presenting the items for board action. Then I'll cover the key changes that have been made to the policies since the June board meeting. Deputy General Counsel Slavitt will then describe proposed modifications to the Student Conduct Code, which would align the Student Conduct Code with the proposed board and administrative policies. He'll also cover a few changes that were not included in the policies that you received last week as part of your docket materials. And that is because these changes have been made in the last few days. Finally, Deputy General Counsel Slavitt will talk about the reasons to take these action items now. So we're seeking 2 actions today. First, we're seeking your adoption of Board of Regents policy, sexual harassment, sexual assault, stalking, and relationship violence, with an implementation date of January 1. We seek a January 1 implementation date because this would allow time for the administrative policy to complete the required 30-day notice and comment period, and then both policies could be implemented simultaneously on January 1. January 1 is also a logical time to change the policy since it's between semesters. And in addition, the administration is hoping to begin rolling out a system-wide sexual misconduct prevention training to employees in the new year. And so implementing the new policies on January 1 would allow the university to use this training to educate our community on the new policies. Second, we're seeking your adoption of modifications to the Student Conduct Code so that it aligns with the proposed board and administrative policies, also with an implementation date of January 1. And finally, we'll be presenting to you the changes made to the administrative policy since our June presentation. Our plan is to now begin the notice and comment period that's required for that administrative policy. And then if requested by the board, we could bring the administrative policy back before the board in December for ratification so that it could be implemented on January 1 along with the board policy. So since the June board meeting, we've made a number of changes to the policies based on helpful feedback that we've received from Regents, either during the June board meeting or in the last couple of weeks. First, the titles of the board and administrative policies have been changed. The prior title was sexual misconduct. The new title is sexual harassment, sexual assault, stalking, and relationship violence. The title change was made to address the concern that under the prior policy title, a person who engaged in non-sexual stalking behaviors could potentially be found in violation of the sexual misconduct policy. So the new title resolves this concern. Second, in response to Regents' suggestions, we propose a definition of the phrase assists or abets to be added to the administrative policy and to the Student Conduct Code. Now looking at the third bullet, we've added a section to the board policy in order to incorporate Regents' comments from the June meeting about the importance of sexual misconduct prevention training. So section 4D of the board policy now states that the university shall adopt procedures on each campus for providing training on prohibited conduct to all members of the university community. And then finally, we've made other modifications based on Regents' input to clarify and reduce duplicative language in the policies. So thank you all for your engagement and input. Now I'll turn to changes made to implement recommendations from the joint report. So as you know, the board has charged President Kaler with reviewing and implementing the recommendations that were made in the joint report on Title IX and athletic discipline practices. This is the report that came out of the board's Special Oversight Committee in August. We've modified the proposed policies to implement 2 recommendations from the joint report. First, the joint report recommends changing the language that we use to describe EOAA's findings about whether a respondent violated university policy. So the idea here is that EOAA makes findings and then a hearing panel also makes subsequent findings, and that this can be confusing. So to remedy this concern, the proposed administrative policy now refers to EOAA findings and also equivalent findings on the non-Twin Cities campuses as initial findings, which will distinguish them from the subsequent decisions of the hearing panels. Moving to the second bullet here, the joint report recommended providing a definition of assists or abets that includes an intent standard, and our proposed definition will implement this recommendation as well. And then just as a side note, the proposed administrative policy also includes a provision providing amnesty for drug and alcohol violations that are connected to reported misconduct and then come to light during a misconduct investigation. And this amnesty provision was already present in the policy that you reviewed in June. However, I want to highlight here that it will implement another of the recommendations from the joint report. Here I'll share the changes made to align the proposed policies with new federal guidance. So as you know, the U.S. Department of Education and the Office for Civil Rights has recently withdrawn its 2011 and 2014 guidance on how schools should respond to sexual misconduct reports. The department has stated that it intends to engage in notice and comment rulemaking to develop new Title IX guidance. In the meantime, the department has implemented a new interim guidance document. And in response to this interim guidance, we've made 3 changes to the proposed administrative policy. First, the interim guidance states that schools should give written notice of sexual misconduct allegations to respondents. That includes sufficient details and that gives respondents sufficient time to prepare a response. So we've added provisions to the administrative policy so that it aligns with this language used in the interim guidance. Second, the interim guidance states that the parties to a sexual misconduct complaint should have the opportunity to respond to an investigation report, either in writing in advance of the decision on responsibility and or at a live hearing where responsibility is determined. And we've also added provisions to the administrative policy so that it follows this interim guidance recommendation. And then finally, the interim guidance states that schools must make interim measures available to both parties. So interim measures are accommodations or modifications that the university makes to a party's classes or living arrangement, work schedule, etc., during a sexual misconduct investigation. And we've revised the proposed administrative policy to align with this new guidance on interim measures. Now Deputy Counsel Slavitt will speak about the proposed modifications to the Student Conduct Code and also the more recent changes to the policies.
Thank you. Chair McMillan, Regents, President Kaler. On the Conduct Code, we have a few changes proposed. The first one relates to the disciplinary offense, which is currently in the code entitled sexual misconduct. So the change is to align it to the new policy, so it will be called sexual harassment, sexual assault, stalking, and relationship violence, and it will also refer to the new policies for the definition. Next, the proposal is to remove the word stalking from what is now the harm to person subdivision in the Conduct Code, since that is duplicative of the stalking that is defined in subdivision 8, the subdivision we just talked about. So we're removing the word stalking from harm to person. The next change, as Ms. Marisam noted, we are proposing and adding the definition of assist or abets to align with the joint report. What you see on this slide is a redlined version of what you received in the docket materials. So in the docket materials, we did provide a definition. Recently, we had discussions with the board and had good discussions with some good input and made a couple of changes. The changes have to do with the elements necessary to show that someone assists or abets. So if you look at subdivision B, as it was submitted to the board in the document materials, it said knows that their actions are significantly likely to help the other person to engage in the preceding misconduct. So in what was originally submitted, someone had to help someone engage in misconduct, and they had to knew that that was what was going to happen or reasonably should have known. We've changed that to now read, as you can see, intends the misconduct to occur or knows that their actions are significantly likely to help the other person engage in the misconduct. So we've taken out the reasonably should know piece. The concern that was raised there, that it could potentially pull into this provision a larger group of individuals that we would think would be appropriate. So we've removed that reasonably should know language. One additional comment about this provision, you'll see that it does impose potential liability on a student or on a student group. This was drafted in a manner to be consistent with the rest of the Conduct Code, which consistently says student or student group. It is my understanding that there is some board interest in giving further consideration to the issue of when a group should be responsible for the conduct of one of its members. This was outside the scope of what we were considering as part of the drafting of the new policies. So we want you to understand the use of this phrase is not intended to and does not change the meaning in the current code about when a student group is responsible for that of its members. It was only used to be consistent. So to the extent further discussion is needed, we consider that to be a separate issue from the changes we're proposing. An additional proposed change to the board policy based on recent board input is the definition of affirmative consent. This proposed modification does not change the intended meaning of the definition, but is only intended to make it clearer for those who read it. The recent change has been to change, quote, reasonable person, close quote, to, quote, sober reasonable person, close quote, and to add back into the definition the phrase under the circumstances. Now, under the circumstances is part of the current affirmative consent definition. It was proposed to be removed and was removed in what was submitted in the docket materials out of concern that it could be misapplied to create an intoxication defense for someone accused of sexual assault. In other words, a person accused of sexual assault could say that he or she was intoxicated and that a reasonable person under the circumstances of being intoxicated would believe that consent had been communicated. That was not the intent, and there was concern that that could lead to that confusion. To remedy this potential problem, we've inserted the word sober and then returned to the policy the phrase under the circumstances, which we believe takes care of that concern and also makes it clear that you do look at all the circumstances of a situation, but not whether a person is intoxicated or not. That is, the accused person. There are also, as you can see, a change in the administrative policy to the assist or abets definition. This is consistent with the changes we just talked about previously. Now, a few words on why we think it makes sense to move forward now and to implement these changes as of January 1. Ms. Marisheim already noted some of the reasons, including in terms of the January 1 date, it makes sense to do it between semesters. It's a good time to communicate new policies during that time. In addition, moving forward now will help us follow the mandate from the 2015 resolution agreement with the Office for Civil Rights. That, as we've talked about before, required the university to adopt a single comprehensive sexual harassment policy, and moving forward now will help us comply with that. The changes also will implement, as we've discussed, several recommendations of the joint report, and also will follow the new federal guidance from the Office of Civil Rights. And finally, and importantly, this will be providing more guidance to the university community through more detailed definitions, more detailed information regarding university expectations and processes. For all of these reasons, we think now is a good time to move forward.
Does that conclude?
That concludes our remarks. We're, of course, happy to answer questions.
Well, Deputy General Counsel Slavitt and Director Marisheim, thank you. Before I call on a regent to make a motion to put this into discussion mode, I want to again recognize the Herculean amount of effort here. This is a big, college-wide, university-wide effort, and we're grateful for that work and grateful for your commitment to continue to refine, improve, and bring this to a level of excellence that it deserves. So with that, Regent Powell, do you have a motion for us to consider?
I do, Chair McMillan. I move the following. First, adoption of Board of Regents policy, sexual harassment, sexual assault, stalking, and relationship violence as presented to the board today with an effective date of January 1st, 2018. Second, adoption of modifications to Board of Regents policy, student conduct code, to align with the above policy as articulated in the revised docket item summary with an effective date of January 1st, 2018. Third, the President and General Counsel are charged to review and make recommendations by December 2017 on provisions within Board of Regents policy, student code of conduct, that establish when the conduct of students can be attributed to student groups. And number 4, the President is also charged to solicit public comments on the proposed administrative policy and bring a final version to the Board of Regents for ratification in December 2017.
Thank you, Regent Powell. That, before looking for a second, this material is before you in the packets that you have there in written form as well. Is there a second?
Second.
Very good, thank you. Discussion. Regent Omari.
Thank you, Chair McMillan, and thank you to everyone for the hard and long work on the policy. I think most know that I was the one that raised some concerns about stalking being under sexual misconduct, and I appreciate the effort to rename it. I still feel strongly that in the situation where there's non-sexual stalking, it should not be looped even into this title. Just simply because I view them significantly differently, and when something pops up that says a person violated sexual harassment, sexual assault, stalking, and relationship violence, we automatically get cued based on human nature and bias to think about sexual assault, sexual harassment, not just stalking. And I worry that not that stalking is okay, right? Let me make that clear, right? I shouldn't say not just stalking. At the same time, human nature oftentimes does not even offer the opportunity for someone to explain or have a conversation about what that violation may have been. I'm not going to fight this or, try to make a motion to amend that, but I want to make clear that I feel strongly that these should be separate.
Point of information, Mr. Chair.
Regent Rocha.
Based on Regent Omari's question, can we get clarification if somebody were to be found responsible for stalking under this policy, how would it be characterized on their record?
Deputy General Counsel Slavitt or Director Maritam?
Chair McMillan, Regent Rocha, I mean, the records from the hearings would reflect the particular provision of the Conduct Code, which would have the full title. They would also reflect, though, the actual conduct that was at issue. So if it was non-sexual stalking, the records would reflect that. We don't have a separate title for that, but a review of the record would show, if they were released, what the conduct was.
Yes, Regent Omari.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in my mind, I'm thinking of a scenario where a student is found in fault of non-sexual stalking, and whether expelled from the institution or not, is attempting to apply to another institution and submits that I was found in violation of X policy. They would have to list the entire policy, right? The policy name. And so that's where my mind is going. And I don't even know at that point if they can give all the details, because I don't know what that would look like, but that's my concern.
Regent Omari, if I were to try and characterize your concern, it's the association between stalking and this provision of the Student Conduct Code and its general heading, and I wouldn't imagine there's any other way to do it other than create a completely separate section of the Student Conduct Code. Otherwise, the association is going to be there, and I don't know that we want to do that, but that would seem to be, based on the answer we just got, probably the only solution here. So, other comments on this topic? I've got a couple more regents with questions. Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Thank you, presenters. I'm coming to this kind of late because originally I thought nothing was going to happen this month on this, and I'm trying to understand exactly what's going on here. Regarding the insertion of the word sober in front of reasonable person in the Board of Regents policy, was there a reason why that word was, that particular word is used?
Director Maritam?
Thank you, Chair McMillan, Regent Hsu. So This discussion came out of concerns that we've gotten from our hearing panel and also from students where there's confusion that, you tell us to look at the policy and the policy says a reasonable person under the circumstances. And the circumstances here are that I was intoxicated, and that a person that was intoxicated to the level I was intoxicated wouldn't have known there was no consent in this situation. So we wanted to clarify that when we're using the reasonable person standard, we're looking at a reasonable person that would be sober, not intoxicated, right? That intoxication is not a defense to sexual assault. It does seem kind of strange to have the word sober in a policy. It kind of seems like non-policy language. I would say it's not uncommon in the sexual misconduct policies at our peer institution, and the reason is that so many of our sexual assault cases do involve intoxication. So that's the reasoning behind the change.
Another question, Regent Hsu?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, now that I understand the intent, it brings to mind maybe some other substances other than alcohol, because I believe the definition of sober applies specifically to alcohol. So is that not true?
Is one of our presenters capable of answering that question, the application of the definition sober?
Chair McMillan, Regent Hsu, the intent was for it to apply to any kind of intoxication by drugs or alcohol.
Okay, because I looked it up, and sober, according to dictionary, says not affected by alcohol, not drunk. So I'm just suggesting that if that's the word you want to use, then we need to somehow say that it applies to any substance in addition to alcohol. So
Under the influence of...
Correct. Yeah, something like that. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents on that particular.
MD in the room now.
Regent Simmons on this point.
Just in common use now in healthcare, sober refers more broadly to not being intoxicated with any substance. We can be more specific if there's confusion, but just so you know, in broad use, it's drugs and alcohol.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Regent Beeson next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the presenters, Dean Finnegan is leading a task force on lessons learned from the football matter, and I had recalled that wasn't concluding until February, some point in the winter. So could we expect to see additional amendments potentially coming out of that process that would inform the administrative policy?
I'll maybe turn to President Kaler for some contextual comments there before the presenters.
Sure. Thank you, Chair McMillan, Regent Beeson. Dean Finnegan is charged with much more than dealing with what happened at the football. In the football situation. It is an initiative on my part broadly to address all issues of sexual harassment on campus. His schedule is to produce a report and some findings, and we will be informed by those. I can't at this point in time know whether that will require further additions or subtractions from the documents in front of you, but they might.
Follow up, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Regent Beeson.
Would we expect, I would hope we would be able to hear from Dean Finnegan directly about the report in a form of a presentation.
President Kaler.
Chair McMillan, Regent Beeson, we certainly can have that happen. That would be appropriate.
Thank you. Regent Anderson.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. I just want to thank you. This is tough work. It's tough work, and it's tough to tackle. I do, and you people are much more competent at doing that than I am, but I do have one question. The joint report, to my knowledge, I remember them saying nomenclature made a difference or something to that effect about creating misunderstandings. And I noticed in the administrative policy, we have went from findings to initial findings. I'm under the impression, and maybe I'm wrong, that the joint report independent review suggested we use like initial charges or initial or charges or something to help with misunderstanding. So I'm just, my only question is, and again, you people are much more competent than I'm sure that was talked about. Can you tell me the rationale from using the word initial findings instead of initial charges, et cetera?
Director Marisam or Mr. Slavitt?
Thank you, Chair McMillan, Regent Anderson. So we thought this was a really good recommendation from the joint report to reduce confusion. We have multiple layers to our process where we have initial findings after an investigation, and then either party can choose to either accept those initial findings or then go to a hearing where a decision of responsibility is made. So we did some thinking about what's the best way to communicate to our community about the difference between those two processes. And this part of the policy applies to students, so we really were thinking about a way to do this that would be understandable to students. And really, we thought that the term initial findings really captured the idea that we are making findings, but these are the initial findings and they're subject to later findings. We did consider using the word charges instead of initial findings. That has some logic if you're looking at the criminal system, it's somewhat comparable. We thought that might be less understandable to students in some ways. We also were concerned about confusing the criminal process with the student process. We know that there's already been confusion on our campus about those two processes, so we thought it would be wise to keep the language separate. That is also a best practice among institutions to try to take the criminal type language out of the student conduct procedures. So those were some of our thought processes as we landed on that language.
Follow-up, Regent Anderson.
And that's terrific. I just had thought that their recommendation was charges. Yours is initial findings. I have no problem with that. You're much more competent. It's just great to hear an explanation of why you chose that. Thank you.
Thank you. Regent Lucas.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. I'm really appreciative of how much thought and effort has gone into this. And as I listen to your explanations, I understand that this was not done lightly. And so I'm very appreciative of what you did. I believe we appreciate the clarity, and we also send the message that we're not retreating on what we consider to be very serious behavior. So thank you.
Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. One of the reasons we're involved in this process is the 2015 agreement that we made with the Office of Civil Rights. And I just received a copy of that, and it has a long list of very specific features that that they want to have included in our policy. And I was just wondering if we checked all the boxes, so to speak, in that, and if not, why not? And do we see any, because they haven't responded to us to let us know that we are in compliance with that agreement. So at what point would we actually see some response after we approve this?
Sure.
Deputy General Counsel Slavitt.
Thank you. Chair McMillan, Regent Hsu, we do believe that the draft proposal in front of you does satisfy the requirements of the Office of Civil Rights. We do not know when we'll get a response from the Office of Civil Rights. I mean, we do know with the recent guidance that office has said once again that we have to comply with existing resolution agreements, so that's a reason to go forward. But in terms of timing, when they'll actually say yes, approved, we don't know. But we do believe that we satisfy this resolution agreement with our draft.
Okay, thank you.
And Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kind of stemming from that, I just say as we go forward over these next couple months in this review period, as I look at this extremely important area of our responsibilities as an institution, the transition from the historical role of holding people accountable for looking at their neighbor's paper on a test to now essentially adjudicating felony level criminal acts. I ask, what are the principles that we're seeking to address through the process? And I really see it as three. The first is, and it's much broader than it was historically, but the first is upholding the appropriate standards of behavior in conduct on campus, whether it's academic behavior or interaction between human beings and harm to person and so on. The next one is, how do we protect people on our campus, students, staff, faculty, where there is an issue between individuals or even groups for that matter. How do you provide protection in the short term so that the actions of another don't have an impact on another person in a way that prevents him or her from having full access and success with the resources at the University of Minnesota. And then finally is how do you do these things in a way that provides the appropriate process that is fair, understandable, and clear, and evenly applied. So we don't do this again out in space. We do this in a context. There's state law, there's federal law, there are other implications of these things, both in terms of resources available to us and expectations, such as through the Office of Civil Rights. I've tended to look at OCR information as guidance. I haven't seen it as dictating what we do, because we as a board have a responsibility for the institution, and so ultimately we have to do what makes the most sense for the institution. So I neither find myself compelled by what they say nor limited by what they say in terms of our effort to try to protect our community as well as adhere standards in a fair and impartial way. So I just want to make those comments as we go into this conversation period, and to really not feel like we have to sort of nibble around the edges necessarily, even though that may be the right answer, but that if there are some sort of broader concepts of how we can address this in a way that maximizes those three principles I described, I would wholeheartedly appreciate engaging in that conversation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Regent Rocha, and I share, and even at the expense of being repetitive, I think it's worth repeating that what we're doing here, first of all, establishing and upholding standards, protecting all, and then a fair adjudicative process. I think that's a great way to break it down and think about our governance duty here. So I appreciate that. Did I see another hand? Regent Omari?
Please, thank you, Regent McMillan. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that you guys are operating under moving pieces and moving parts. And as I've tried to keep up with federal guidelines and different conversations and different case studies across the country, I have not been able to keep up. So while we might not all agree on what this should look like, it goes with tremendous respect for the work that you guys are doing and the hard work that you're putting into it in the midst of unknowns. So in that light, just thank you.
Thank you, Regent Omari. And coming back to Regent Powell's motion, I don't know, I want to ask if it's clear to all of the regents what we're doing and what we're not doing, and a key element of items 3 and 4, and that is that this is not chiseled into granite yet, that we're asking for some input on a couple key elements of something we're going to approve today. We'll have another opportunity if that feedback comes back on that point about when the conduct of an individual can be attributed to an organization. That's one. But the whole administrative policy, which is comprehensive in scope and nature, is also out for comment, and the board would use that same opportunity to learn from that. So it's our intent to move with you and enable the university to take the steps it needs to take going forward, but we're not jumping into anything. So does the board appreciate the 3 elements of this, the 2 that we're going to approve and the 1 that remains open for action in December? All right, at that, the Powell motion is before us, and if I don't hear or see more discussion, I'd call for a vote on it. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed? Very good. Thank you. And again, thank you both. I feel like we have an ambidextrous team out there. I never know which of you to call on. You're a good pair, so thank you.
Thank you.
Well, good. All right, item 8 on our agenda is our conflict management plan, and I see our Chief Compliance Officer, Mr. Coomer, coming back to the table to review for us and put in front of us for review today, but not action yet. That'll be December, a conflict management plan for our president.
Thank
Mr.
you, Chair.
Coomer.
Thank you, Chair McMillan, and members of the committee. The purpose of this item is board review of an updated draft to President Kaler's conflict management plan. This update reflects Sam Kaler's, President Kaler's son's, departure from Mortensen Construction and retains the mechanisms applicable to Charles Kaler, also President Kaler's son's, continued employment with Russell Reynolds and Associates. President Kaler has had a conflict management plan in place since May of 2013 to address potential purchasing conflicts due to the employment of his 2 adult sons by companies that have contracts with the university, or that have had contracts. The 2013 plan was approved by the board in October of 2016. And that's my setup, so.
All right. Questions by the board here before we act on this? Thank you. I don't have any myself. I don't see any hands up in the air here. Good. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll move it.
Very good. What's that?
This is review.
It's review only. I said that when I opened my comment. Sorry. That is my confusion.
I unmove it.
You unmove it. Thank you. And I retake my request for a motion. So we're procedurally correct. The board has an opportunity now between now and December to consider this, and we will act on it at our December meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
On behalf of the Governance and Policy Committee, this is a great example of talking about this review action opportunity.
Yes.
Just highlighting the importance of the work of this great committee that is led by Regent Beeson and someone else.
No motion called for, but duly noted. All right, we are on to the report of the committees, which is our not our final, but close to final, our penultimate piece of work here. And I'm going to start with audit and compliance and call on Regent Cohen, the chair of that committee, for a report. I don't believe you had any action items.
We did not. The committee had 4 discussion items. First, we heard from the chair of the Department of Psychiatry, Dr. Sophia Vinograd, who provided an update on the department's marked progress in the protection of human research participants. Importantly, she also spoke about healing some of the past problems. The discussion marked the conclusion of the committee's regular updates on these efforts. We continued our discussion on the institutional risk profile by reviewing the risk principles that were endorsed by the board in 2011. The committee discussed possible changes to those principles, and Chief Auditor Klatt agreed to take that feedback and propose new language for our consideration. Our next step in updating the risk profile is a discussion about an administrative list of significant risks facing the university, which will come in our December meeting. The committee also received an update on audits performed by the Office of Internal Audit. Chief Auditor Klatt reported that since the last update at the June meeting, 51% of the outstanding recommendation rated as essential had been implemented, exceeding the expected and usual implementation rate of 40%. Audit reports issued since the last update were mostly very good. However, despite very diligent work by the admissions office, the Twin Cities Campus Office of Admissions Audit resulted in 21 recommendations, with 15 rated as essential. In the final item, we received an overview of the annual financial statement review process that the committee will undertake in the coming weeks. The committee will review the fiscal year 2017 audited financial statements and have an opportunity to provide feedback and ask questions in advance of the issuance from the external auditor. Mr. Chair, that concludes my report.
Thank you, Regent Cohen. And on to our Finance and Operations Committee, and I will turn to Regent Anderson for a vote on an action item there too, I believe. So,
thank you, Regent McMillan. This is the report of the Finance and Operations Committee report, and we don't have one action item, we have several action items. The committee considered seven action items this month, starting with the President's recommended 6-year capital plan and 2018 state capital request. The committee voted to recommend approval of the resolution related to the 2017 6-year capital plan and the 2018 state capital request. I move approval of this resolution.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Discussion on that.
Thank you.
All right, hearing no discussion. Oh, I'm sorry, Regent Swigum. I expected some discussion, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
It's your turn.
I thought you knew I had an amendment.
I was waiting for a signal there. So.
I was waiting for you to recognize it.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Members, in a very non-confrontational way, I want to offer a couple of opportunities for you to have your voice heard in a different way on this capital request. I have an amendment that I shared with you, I think, through board last evening or yesterday afternoon. I have the same amendment to offer today, except I split it. I divided the amendment to make it easier for you to make a decision in the amendment coming forward. Mr. Chairman, does it make any difference to you which amendment I would take first to the capital request plan?
It does not, no. Regent Swigum.
Members, all of us have received a letter from a few members of the legislature. A number of us have had contacts with members of the legislature. I know a number of us have had numerous discussions, Regent Sue, myself, Regent Rosha Johnson, with at least one or two members of the legislature as we look forward to our capital plan. In specific, those members have sent us a letter regarding our attention to Glen Sheen, a property that the university owns, property that is in bad need of repair, property that needs attention to. Without question, it does. Without question, we have about $2 or $3 billion of other properties that need attention to that have been on our 6-year plan for a number of years. So, members, I have an amendment being, I think Sarah is giving you the amendment, which would, and President Kaler, I meant it sincerely yesterday when you were listening to members of the legislature. I think that is good. I think that is absolutely wonderful that you and your team, Matt Kramer, are listening to members of the legislature. I think we over-listened, maybe in this case. Members, I'm going to give us an opportunity, rather than putting in our capital request a $4 million request for Glen Sheen. I think that would be $4 million from the state and $4 million from the university. A request that would eliminate that $4 million request, yet give an INCL, and INCL is a word, Mr. President, that is used in a few card games, try to suggest a direction or a movement to go. Give an INCL less than $4 million. I think what the legislature wants, at least most of the members, and at least the chair, which I am a very, very close friend of, is a opportunity to be able to talk about Glen Sheen during the next legislative session. If we don't have it in our request, they probably feel they can't talk about it. Rightfully so, because they would respond to our requests. So, members, my first amendment to you would be to remove the $4 million request, reduce our request to the capital investment request to the legislature, but creatively list some HEAPR projects that can be done around the state by campus, and creatively tuck into the Duluth campus Glen Sheen, the Glen Sheen Mansion. I think this gives the legislature the opportunity to make the discussion they want without us putting too much priority to the Glen Sheen property over other properties which we've had in the 6-year plan. And I just did again some little minimal research. You know, folks, I can't sit here and honestly, and you can't, because many of you have been here last year and did the 6-year plan, and the year before that, and the year before that, and the year before that. of which Glen Sheen has not appeared, but the $6 million for the Arboretum has. And the $96 million for Fraser Hall has. In fact, in Fraser Hall, it is said a critical building in our 6-year plan. The $42 million for our Institute of Child Development, for our Center for Early Childhood Education Research, has appeared and is there. The $35 million for a dairy teaching and research facility is on our plan. At UMD itself, the limnology building, Chancellor Black, is there for $4,900,000, I think. And at one time, in trying to creatively approach this, I thought maybe a way to do this would be to block grant some monies to Duluth, to UMD, to Chancellor Black, and let him spend the money as he wants to. And if he chooses to do Glen Sheen over the limnology building, which I'd be appalled if he did, but he would have the opportunity to do so. And I can go on and on and on. But it seems to me what we're doing with the plan that came out of the committee is we're taking Glen Sheen and we're putting it to the front of the line inappropriately, to the head of the class inappropriately. Let's just give the legislature a nod, inkle, that they can talk about it. And if they want to give us the $4 million, we'll take it. But I don't know how we can put it above these other projects. And maybe even further, members, to some of you, my friends, who are very concerned about the autonomy of the university, the constitutional autonomy, and I recognize the importance of that. Constitutional autonomy is one thing when it's by law tied with $600 or $700 million. That's one thing. But constitutional autonomy, when it just comes from a letter signed by four or five legislators, a completely different level of being of autonomy. And I think that we need to respond to both of those. So I offer this as a non-confrontational option to address a concern which has been forwarded to us by the legislature. Glen Sheen match.
Thank you, Regent Swigum. Is there a second?
Second.
Very good. That's been moved and seconded. And before we look for discussion on that, I would just note that I believe the recommendation out of the committee was to seek the $4 million, but not to commit $4 million of university funding. It was to seek private and public sector partners to match that. That's correct, President?
That would be correct.
I didn't mean to correct you. I just want to be sure nobody thinks we're committing university dollars there. That's
there was a $4 million match there, right?
Yes. Yep. Regional Mari.
Point of clarification: Are we talking about both of the motions that we have in front of us? The dollar.
I believe only the first piece on Glen Sheen, and then Regent Swigum has another.
Oh, wait.
On total size of request, correct?
Mr. Chairman, Regent Amari, to make things, I think, easier and more complicated and less messed up for members of other regions. Here, I tried to separate the amendment and make it more clean. I would have divided the amendment, but I found out this when I looked at it, it wasn't very easily dividable, so I just need to.
So to answer Regent Omari's question, we are talking about this one with that Regent Swigum just discussed. Yes, not the short one, the longer one. So Regent Omari, with that answer to your question in mind, you have input for the Swigum.
Just another question. I'm just looking at the dollar amount. So the 259 will ultimately go down to 234 million in this.
President Kaler.
Chair McMillan, Regent Omari, Regent Swigum, and Vice President Burnett. Do you have a copy of this, Vice President Burnett? Okay. And because I think the numbers are slightly confused here. I believe what Regent Swigum wants to do is eliminate our Glen Sheen Renewal Challenge Initiative, which is $4 million from the state and $4 million from other parties. And so I believe that the numbers would be correctly amended to reduce the request to the legislature from 259.8 to 255, and to not change the commitment for the University of Minnesota. Is that correct, Senior Vice President Burnett?
Yes.
So I would, the record needs to, I think, get that right.
Reflect that in the changes here.
Sure.
So the reference to 251,800 is 255,800,000.
And the 21,267.7 is unchanged.
Unchanged.
Mr.
Okay.
Chairman?
Yes, Senior Vice President Burnett.
I'm sorry, I misheard what President Kaler said as we were coming up here, but there was $4 million requested from the state.
Yep.
And $4 million included in the request of other funds, non-university. So we believe the 251.8 is correct, the first number struck, because you would pull both the 4 and the 4. This is correct. And that's the $8 million difference.
All right, we seem to have some disagreement here, so it should be 251?
That's what it says.
That's what's written.
Yes, I think it's correctly drafted.
And the misunderstanding was coming from were we removing 4 or 8, and what we're doing is under Regent Swigham's motion, we'd be removing 4, but that's already reflected.
So there's 4, the total request went in with 4 plus 4.
Okay.
So it reduced the state request by 4, but a total project of 8, or total request of 8.
So all the numbers here, the 251.8 and the 234 are correct as written.
We believe so, yes.
And the 17?
Yes.
That should be 21.3.
Oh, wait a minute.
The missing, Mr. Chair, the remaining missing 4 is from private sources.
Right.
So it doesn't change the universities, it changes the states by 4.
Right. Let's give Senior Vice President Burnett and Vice President Bertelsen a moment to confer.
So is that right? We believe it's right.
While they do that, can I?
Why don't you work on the numbers, and Regional Mari, other thoughts, and then Regent Beeson?
I just want to make sure I'm understanding properly the changes between the two. So when we look at the request that was approved yesterday, we have HEPR and then several other projects which include Pillsbury, Clinching that are not falling under HEPR. In this new case, we would take, say, for example, Pillsbury and put it under our HEPA request. Is that correct?
No. Mr. Chairman.
Regent Swiggum.
Regent Amari, no.
No. Okay.
We would, this amendment was intended to, and I think the board staff drafted, and Brian is shaking his head correctly, yes, to address only the Glen Sheen request and not the Pillsbury request.
No, that's okay.
Sorry.
Further questions, Regional Mari?
I think my PhD didn't prepare me for this. Grad or my master's.
Think of those of us who don't have a PhD.
Geez, yeah.
Yeah, Regent Beeson next, and then Regent Johnson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. While those details are being sorted out, just sort of backing up. Your comments are fair, Regent Sviggum, and I think we all appreciate the governance lessons that you've outlined. I'm concerned about, and I think there's a slippery slope delineating all these HEPA projects, because we don't need the legislature to ever get into picking and choosing HEPA projects. That's really a micromanaging exercise, and I'm concerned that if we start and secondly, our listing of HEPA projects may change over the next 5 or 6 months. It's a pretty dynamic list, so I think that there's risk with getting into individual HEPA projects at this point and introducing those to the legislature. What does make this different is, as Chair McMillan said, is we're not. The match is entirely local, and this facility is more for the benefit of the state and the local community than it is. It's a value to UMD. It's a brand. I do agree. It's a brand builder for UMD. Yeah. But I like the way the match has been structured with state money and local money, and not a university match. And for that reason, I think that makes it. I wish the timing had been different, and that's part of your point, Regent Sviggum. Why this comes through the 11th hour. I think it could have been done earlier, and I wish it had been. Thank you.
I've got Regent Johnson and then Regent Simmons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regent Swigum, torn about this issue, and let me lay it out. First of all, Glen Sheen is owned by the University of Minnesota. It's ours. And because it's ours, it's kind of like, you know, any of us own a house or own a car, we have to maintain it. And we're kind of pushing the ball around, say, well, you do it. And now the proposal is UMD and the administration, you make some choices here between chemistry labs and museums and whatever. I think, not sure that's the right way to do it either. Second of all, I had a question of Mr. Bertelsen. What is the most significant repair that's needed at Glen Sheen to at some point you say or others say, you know, we're going to shut it down. It's unsafe. Are we at that point?
Vice President Bertelsen.
Mr. Chair, Regent Johnson, I'd say the most significant ongoing issue is concerns with the boiler, and which is we're actually Duluth campus is working on as we speak, and you know the failure of that system would then is obviously a significant operational risk to the program, but there were, you know, we've been completing 4 different pre-designs and for 4 different components, so we have better information. So we're moving ahead with understanding the actual needs and estimates to address a variety of issues, and that's certainly one of them. And that's at this, you know. In the meantime, we're working to provide good maintenance and at the campus right now, doing repair on that as we speak.
So, Mr. Chairman?
A follow-up, Regent Johnson?
To clarify the Swigum motion, if we don't do anything and just adopt the capital plan as presented to us, do you not think that the legislature will take into account Glen Sheen at some point in time? And the fact that we talked about a $4 million plus a $4 million local match, if you will, that they will take that into consideration and start moving down that road. So my question is, why do we have to do anything?
Regent Swigum.
Let me try, and I'm not sure that I would, that appropriate speaking for somebody else, but I think Chair Erdahl, the chair of the Capital Investment Committee, as well as a few other legislators, feel that if Glen Sheen is not in our request, that they do not even have the opportunity to speak about prioritize Glen Sheen or put a dollar amount to it. And I respect that. I respect that totally, that the legislature should get the requests from the university, from INSCU, from Historical Society, wherever, and work within the bounds. And obviously not give the request everything that's requested, but at least work within those bounds. I think that that's appropriate, Senator Johnson. And I'm not, Regent Beeson, I'm not insensitive to the fact that listing some examples of HEPA projects might not be a little bit inappropriate. That's why they're put down as examples, not as to what would be done, but I was trying to find a creative way, members. And you know, I did think about block granting to the chancellor some monies, and then I decided that's maybe not the right way to go. And but I did go so far to find out that, you know, usually out of our HEPA money, 11% goes to the outstate campuses, and about 6 or 7% to Duluth. And you know, then the chancellor can make his decision as to whether it be the Limnology Building or Glen Sheen, and I know what he would choose. But I'm just trying to get to the legislature what they want from the standpoint of being able to make a discussion, a decision, without putting us in, I think, an embarrassing situation, folks. Very honestly, I mean, how can we, because of a letter, put Glen Sheen on our priority list that hasn't been on our 6-year list, ahead of Fraser Hall and the Arboretum and the Dairy Teaching and Research Facility and the Institute of Child Development Building that you have talked about for the last 6 years or 4 years or 3 years, whatever it is. How can you do that? I don't see how I could in good faith do it. So I'm giving you an opportunity. I'm giving you an out. Trying to.
All right, I've got 4 regents lined up, including Regent Lucas, who I unintentionally and apologetically skipped, but Chancellor Black is here, and I think before we have any more dialogue among the regents, President Kaler's asked if he could have an opportunity to talk a little bit about Glen Sheen and how it fits up there. You're in a better position than me, certainly, to talk about that. So, Chancellor Black, welcome.
Thank you very much, Chair McMillan and members of the board. I appreciate the opportunity to address this. I want to emphasize that we're always in a tough spot with Glen Sheen. Obviously, it's a great asset, but it is a statewide asset, it is a tourism asset. It is certainly not in the core academic mission of UMD, although we do have regular academic activities there, so it's not totally divorced either. Puts us in a tough spot because we want to see it maintained and be successful. But I have real concerns about listing it in with a list of HEPRA possibilities for UMD, because I certainly could not and would not prioritize Glen Sheen over the humanities building or the old chemistry building as it is here. So I'm really concerned about listing it, and some of you have already addressed that. The humanities building, as an example, is in deplorable conditions. Our faculty and students in that building have to put up with tremendous concerns over the environment of the building, and it's something that in my mind needs immediate attention. So I appreciate the efforts for Glen Sheen. Personally, I like the notion of it being included in a request but separate from HEPRA, because our HEPRA demands and needs are so incredible. If we want to talk about block grants, that's another discussion, and I would speak about that in a much different way. But I just want to express my concerns over listing Glen Sheen as part of a list of HEPRA possibilities.
I'm going to give the motion maker, Regent Swigum, a chance to...
Just a chance to respond.
Yes.
Very quickly.
Yep.
Members, and I'm sure you understand this, and but it needs to be said. Chancellor Black, you speak with great wisdom. We would put you in a situation of maybe making some tough decisions within the deeper amounts of some great needs. But it's no different than we're trying to do, folks, with the request of the legislature, the $4 million. We have some great needs. And do you need me to go through Fraser Hall and the Institute of Child Development and Dairy Teaching and Limnology buildings? Do you need to go through them again? And Chancellor, in the same way that you were being put in that squeeze, if we request the $4 million over those facilities, which have been on the list for 4, 5, and 6 years, it's the same situation, isn't it? Yes. He nodded yes.
I'm going to go back to the Regent, the list I have, but I would encourage anybody that might have other questions for Chancellor Black to raise those as we go. But I'm going to go back now to Regent Lucas and then Regent Simmons. And I've got more after that.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. I just have a procedural question. I would love to see the bonding bill uncluttered and fewer requests, but why is it if Glen Sheen is in the bonding bill that the legislature can't discuss it? I understand that they should have the opportunity to discuss it, and I'm not sure.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Regent Swigum.
Representative Lucas, there's an old statement that says the legislature can do anything it wants to at any time it wants to, and it can.
Okay.
But it's maybe not respectful of the process, and it's maybe not respectful of, in this case, requests of the university and the work we do and the requests we make, MINSCU, correctional facilities, the Historical Society. You try to play within the requests that are given to you and try not to disrespectfully go outside their requests, and that's why they need an inkle. They need a nod. Senator Johnson, am I fair in how I'm responding to that? the legislature can't do anything it wants at any time it wants, as long as it's constitutional.
I think Regent Johnson nodded.
Well, Mr. Chairman, the House did whatever they wanted. We followed the Constitution.
All right, Regent Swigum.
I don't want to put anybody of my friends in a bad situation. I feel pretty strongly about this, folks. But if you don't, I'll withdraw the amendment. I can withdraw it, and I don't want anybody to have to vote on this. I just think we're wrong. I absolutely think we're wrong. Even though we feel the pressure of a few legislators, not even legislative leadership. What do we do? What about autonomy, Regent B said? This is a letter. This isn't a law with $600 million. This is a letter. Maybe you don't feel as long as I do. I'll withdraw the amendment, Mr. Chairman.
I don't think we should do that.
No, please don't.
We're, as long as people are cognizant of the fact we do have additional business, I'm happy to continue having the dialogue a little, but please limit your comments in response to Regent Swigum's motion.
But I don't want to get into a conversation.
No, I think it's a perfectly valid discussion, Regent Swigum. So Regent Lucas, did you get your question answered?
Partially.
Partially. All right, do you want to ask another? All right, Regent Simmons.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. I seconded this motion because I think that Regent Swigum's intent is a good one, and I think the principles he used are good, and I wanted us to discuss this. That doesn't mean I'm going to vote for it, because I do have some concerns about some specific issues, and I need some help in resolving those, so I want this discussion, and I'm grateful for it. These are my questions, and I think these people at the table are in a good position with the President of answering them. One is there's a sense of urgency that here, and I don't know if that's driven by politics or if it's driven by building issues. So some help there would be good for me, because things do jump on to our 6-year capital list and priorities shift when something comes up we just got to do. So I'd like to know what's driving this. The second issue I have would be some concerns listing examples in a resolution. I worry because resolutions carry a lot of weight, and so I think it's probably not a good format to have examples in. The third comment I'd make is you answered my question, but I think it's problematic for UMD if we put this with their other projects. So I don't support doing that, but I'd like to tell us why the original proposal and this proposal, which one's going to serve the university better and why?
Senior Vice President Burnett.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regent Simmons, I think we would go with the President's recommendation to include it. And it's not, I think we have some deadlines about getting our capital requests to the state and we need time to work it. And two, I would say that nothing's going to be done overnight for Glensheen. What we have to work on, what Vice President Bertelsen was talking about, is interim steps short of some major capital infusion that can keep it operational, and those will continue. So even no matter what the board decides to do today, there's some interim steps that we have to work in concert with UMD just to protect the asset and keep it functional as possible. But there isn't really a great source of needed capital infusion. You just can't make it on the operations alone. So I think that, I guess my recommendation would be stick with the President's request, with no disrespect to Regent Swigum. We do agree with you that putting this language in the resolution is troubling for us as well, because things change in the dollar amount we get from the state, and things happen over the winter. If we are fortunate enough to get a bonding bill, we may adjust this list well before we deploy any of the capital that we would be so fortunate to receive from the state.
All right.
Mr. Chairman.
Regent Swigum.
I'm so sorry for pushing on this, but if this is so critical and the President's request is so timely, so needed, Wednesday night, at what time did it come forward, Vice President Burnett? I mean, where was this in September? Where was this in August? Where was it in July? Where is it in June? Well, folks, if that isn't somewhat concerning to you, it ought to be.
President Kaler. Sorry.
Mr. Regent Simmons, your question is the absolute one we should be asking. What's in the best interest of the University of Minnesota, the citizens of the state of Minnesota? And and I'm going to look you right in the eye, and I don't even know all these projects, but I'm going to tell you, in the best interest of the state and best interest of the university, the chemistry building at Fraser Hall, which is an FCA critical building, and I haven't viewed it, and the Institute of Child Development, and the limnology building at UMD, and the dairy teaching and research facility, and I'm going to go on, are in much more interest of the state of Minnesota than Glensheen Hall.
President Kaler, do you have a thought on?
Yes, let me just be, very pragmatic about this, because much of what Regent Sviggum said is right. We have a pragmatic problem. It's called Glensheen. We own it. We have to get money to fix it. The money to fix it can either come out of HEAPR, which will displace other critical needs for academic research, or it can come some other way. And we are, I think, taking an advantage of an opportunity in which legislators have expressed a willingness to engage on Glensheen, which is A, recent, and B, unprecedented. So I feel like we're taking, admittedly, a rapid action in a pragmatic way to deal with an opportunity to fund Glensheen that didn't exist in July or August, to answer your question why we were talking about it then. And we're doing it in this way, which is admittedly unusual, but it isolates it from the separate HEAPR ask. That's why we're doing it. It's not any more complicated than that, and it is what it is. We had a similar opportunity legislatively a few years ago with the Bell Museum. I made a deal for the Bell Museum on my cell phone in the Monte Carlo restaurant parking lot. So sometimes it's a process. I don't need to tell you about the political process. Sometimes you get an opportunity, and I feel like we're trying to jump on it. And this is a way that honors the HEAPR, depoliticizes the HEAPR process itself. That's where we are.
Regent Sviggum.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that, being opportunistic and jumping on it when you have an opportunity. Carpe diem, I think, right?
Yep.
Seize the day. Is that what that's the only Norwegian I know, by the way, is carpe diem.
Norwegian?
It's Southern Norway, Regent Johnson.
We're going to get you a Latin, a law degree, but that kind of Latin.
We will never know the answer to this. No, we will never know the answer, folks. But if the legislature has a bonding bill, that's up in the, we don't even know if they'll have a bonding bill. If they do have one next May, let's suppose we get $100 million. And would we have been able to get $100 million, or is Glensheen going to be 4 of that 100 reduced? I mean, would we have got 96? Or, I'm glad to take the $4 million. That's not a problem. But is it going to be at the expense of a little reduction in HEAPR that we really, really need? Or is it going to be at the expense of Pillsbury? Is it going to be at the expense of somebody else? I don't know that. We'll never know the answer. But I'm concerned about that, Mr. President. That we'll give you Glensheen, the legislator sitting over there thinking, but rather than give you 100 in HEAPR, you're going to get 95.
I've got at least 4 regents that want to continue to speak. I would ask that you speak to the amendment and that we rapidly bring this to a vote. Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we can all note for future reference that Regent Sviggum is especially empowered the day after National Farmers Day. So
once a year.
He's bringing the heat. Couple thoughts. As others have said, I really appreciate the policy analysis that Regent Sviggum is going through in this process. I see it from my foxhole, from my experiences, and I'm not in agreement on this, and let me explain a little bit why. One of the reasons, Regent Sviggum, why I would articulate that it's different from a timing standpoint, because that's an absolutely valid position. How does this all of a sudden find its way here? One is a lot of the other projects won't necessarily have this independent funding requirement. And actually, I would have a point of information that from the state standpoint, if that private money is not generated, does the state money actually end up going to Glen Sheen? I'm not certain of that, but that's an important question. But that would be one of the reasons why Regents Bigham, the fact that this is an opportunity to make this improvement. You know, part of, without going too much into the actual project itself, you know, when somebody's at the university and they're here in McNamara, just, you know, there's the ownership considerations, but you've got Northrop, we have a very nice presentation. And Glen Sheen, as amazing as it is, there are parts of it that are pretty bad, you know, where you have just dilapidated, you know, masonry and so on. And, you know, and for the number of folks that go through there, that's a concern to me. It's a concern to me. And if we have the ability to leverage private support along with state support, I would like to see us take advantage of that. And you're absolutely right. We don't know whether this support is going to come out of something else or whether this will reflect a growth in support. You know, my once bitten, twice shy approach to this stuff is, in the past, when we've tried to be really reserved, we found ourselves simply being hurt. Another part of that was, you know, when you go against the political juggernaut that is MnSCU, there's a facility in every district, right? And so, you know, certainly you have a lot of folks coming together to support the different projects that are being requested by MnSCU as they fight for these dollars. You know, when we have a portion of the legislature that reflects an interest in something, you know, if you have folks that are interested in what's going on at the experiment stations and all of the campuses and so on and so forth, that is one of the few ways that we can sort of maintain that opportunity for priority. And so I certainly don't feel that a vote for placing this on our request is in any way me saying we're no longer autonomous. I consider the information that's coming from this group of legislators to be data that I use to process, you know, hey, does this make sense for us to put this in there? And so I don't want to, I'm certainly not going to concede the point that I have just given up my responsibility as a board member to do whatever a letter of 4 legislators says I should do. That's not the case. I am convinced that I will never have this budget, this request prioritized the way I would want it to be prioritized. I'm always going to say, well, I maybe think that, you know, Pillsbury might be here, whereas, you know, the Armory might be here, or so on and so forth. But I'm very free market when it comes to what we present to the legislature. I respect that you know, your methodology for being reserved in our request and you know, not over asking that's the way you would approach it. That's not the way I approach it. I approach it from the standpoint that I want to give information to the legislature about what our needs are in the broadest context, and they're grown men and women. They can look at this and make decisions as well on their own. So I look at this as an opportunity to put this out there. We have an indication that there is some legislative support for it. It is unique from other requests because it's going to be half funded by outside support, perhaps even more than that. And so from that standpoint, I'm in support of it, recognizing that all the points you've made have to be fundamentally part of all of our analysis as we do this on an annual basis.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm ready to withdraw my, I'm good with the discussion.
Okay.
I'm a team player.
I'm going to accept that withdrawal.
I'll withdraw it. I'm trying to, members, I'm just trying to find a way without us saving some face too and doing our due diligence to the important projects that we're leaving on the table, that we're not bringing forward to.
Thank you for the debate. I think it's a good dialogue, and I think you're raising a very fundamental question.
Not withdraw my second amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, so we don't have an amendment to vote on. We still have Regent Anderson's committee report on this, which includes a motion. We now have a second motion, I believe, from Regent Swigum that if you'd like to make, we'll find a second and then we can debate.
I'll do it very quickly. Mr. Chairman, members, we should probably be requiring or requesting $1 billion from the legislature for HEAPR. We probably should. I think we've got $2 or $3 billion of needs out there. Our needs are great. Reality tells me something else. Reality tells me that we've never received 234 or 200 and what now is it, $59 million? Never received it, never gonna. Not gonna happen. So I think we need to be a little bit more realistic. The second amendment before you, I'm going to change right now with an amendment to the amendment. My amendment to the amendment would be line 3, after the comma, after I've just been beaten up for 20 minutes, remove and removing the Glen Sheen Renewal Challenge Initiative. Delete that.
So we leave it in.
So after comma, delete and removing the Glen Sheen Renewal Challenge Initiative, because we've just had the discussion for 20 minutes, right? And then in the further be it resolved, we have to address the numbers correctly. Mr. Burleson, can you help me? Is it adding 4 million back in, or is it adding 8 million back in?
So the 186, Mr. Chairman, Regents Swigum would add 8 million back.
8 million? Okay.
And then, but the consisting of 174 from the state of Minnesota would be 178.
170. That's
yes,
what
sir.
I figured. Do members have that?
And
talking about the same thing?
And 12 to 16.
Yes.
So, just for clarity here, Regent Swigum's motion is 186, 178, and 16?
No, sir.
No, what's the first one?
194.
194.
178 and 16.
Very good.
That is correct.
All right. Is there a second?
That one right.
Not a second. I was...
Did I cut you off there? Did you want to further introduce it? Sorry.
I'm working on the Senate because I'm looking across to Regent Lucas, because this is my way of listening to her and the focus on Pillsbury Hall and making sure that gets funded as our top priority and top focus, which I think it should be. I've heard you for the last couple months about this. Okay, obviously I haven't talked to anybody ahead of time about this. I'm not going to lobby my friends. I'm just not going to do it. I think we need to be realistic. If we got this amount, we'd be thrilled. Right. We ain't going to get this amount. Not going to happen. Not in a bonding bill that's, as I told you yesterday, going to be less than $1 billion and 800 of GO. You take 13% of that, Mr. President, and you're talking, you were sitting next to me yesterday, you were talking 120, 125. So we could request a lot more. There's no doubt the need's there. I just want to be a little realistic, folks, and that's the game I play in. So that's my amendment.
Is there a second? All right, there is no second. So we...
Mr. Chairman, just one more question.
Regent Swigum.
Do we operate by rules of order of Masons or of... Roberts. Okay.
All right.
Remember, so you don't know in Robert's rules of order, you need a second. In Mason's rules of order,
do not.
You don't need a second because every voice in the country or in the state ought to be able to be heard.
We need to go back and amend our bylaws because the Article 6, Section A specifically states Robert's Rules of Order. So, all right, we are back to Regent Anderson's motion from the committee yesterday to adopt the 6-year capital plan and the 2018 legislative capital request. Is there a second for that?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
No.
Very good. That carries. And Regent Anderson, onward with finance and operations business.
I have to figure out where I am here. Okay. The committee voted unanimously to recommend approval of the resolution related to the issuance of commercial paper and the establishment of a commercial paper facility. I move approval of this resolution.
For second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Onward.
The committee voted unanimously to recommend approval of the resolution related to asset allocation guidelines. I move approval of this resolution.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Very good.
The committee voted unanimously to recommend approval of the resolution related to the proposed labor agreement with the University Education Association. I move approval of this resolution.
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve the labor agreements. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
The committee voted unanimously to recommend approval of the resolution related to the proposed labor agreement with ASCME Local 3260 Healthcare Unit. I move approval of this resolution.
It's been moved and seconded on the ASCME contract. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries.
The committee voted unanimously to recommend approval of the resolution related to the proposed labor agreement with the International Brotherhood of Electric Workers Local 292 Broadcast Technicians. I move approval of this resolution.
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve the IBW contract. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? That carries as well. Regent Anderson.
The committee voted unanimously to recommend approval of the consent report, which included the Central Reserve's contingency allocations, the purchase of goods and services over $1 million, one real estate transaction, the demolition of the quarantine barn on the Twin Cities campus, a resolution related to historically eligible asset of Pioneer Hall, the appointment of Michael Bertelson as Vice President of University Services, the appointment of Alan Levine as Vice President for Research, and the secondary dean title, Academic Leadership for the University Libraries. I move approval of the consent report.
Second.
Moved and seconded on those items. All discussion.
Yeah.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Thank you, Chair McMillan. That concludes my report.
Very good. Thank you, Regent Anderson. To the comments earlier about the volume of transactional business in that committee, I think we just saw that prima facie evidence of that. So on to governance and policy. Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Governance and Policy Committee took up one action item this month. The committee voted unanimously to recommend approval of the proposed amendments to the Board of Regents policy, institutional conflict of interest, that will modify the financial disclosure requirements for university officials. I move adoption of the proposed amendments.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to take that action. Discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you, Regent Rocha. Others to comments?
Thank you, Chair McMillan. That concludes my report.
Our committee references are still fresh in our mind from that one. So on to litigation review and Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Litigation Review Committee met yesterday, and at our meeting we discussed the annual report on legal matters submitted by the Office of General Counsel and noted the one-year anniversary of Counsel Doug Peterson. We also adopted a resolution that authorized the closing of the meeting to discuss matters subject to attorney-client privilege. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Regent Beeson. On to, in our final committee, Regent Omari, and I know you have some action items as well.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. The only transactional item people care about is me getting done with the committee meeting on time. However, that did not happen. We did have one action item. It was the consent report. The committee recommends approval of the consent report, which included academic program additions, changes, and discontinuations, and conferral of tenure for outside hires. I would move approval of the consent report.
Second.
There's a second for that motion. Discussion. Seeing none, we'll take a vote. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed? Very good. Regent Omari, that conclude your report?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. That takes us to old business. Is there any old business before the board? Seeing none, I'll move to new business, and we do have one item of new business before us today, perhaps two. I'll ask President Kaler for the first of those.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. I just wanted to correct a misstatement I made in my president's report. The medical school was ranked 25th in 2016. In 2017, it's actually ranked in the range 51 to 75, but the public health program is ranked number 24. So I apologize for misstating those facts in my report and wanted to clear the record.
All right. On to new business. Do I see Dean Durgan here still? There she is. We will review a resolution. This is new business related to dissolution of the Minnesota 4-H Foundation and a transfer of those assets to the University of Minnesota Foundation. Our Dean of Extension, Dean Durgan, is here to walk through the item, as well as counsel. And this item is for our review today. We will consider action at our December meeting. There was not time to get this into the docket materials, hence we're taking it in new business now. Dean Durgan, cognizant of the hour, can you give us a sense of what we're doing here?
I will, Chair
Thank you.
McMillan and Board. So the Minnesota 4-H Foundation was established in 1980. That was before Extension had its own development office. And when I became dean 2 years after that, we did develop and establish a development office within Extension and collaborating with the University of Minnesota Foundation. So I have had extensive conversations with the Minnesota 4-H Foundation Board and UMF about moving forward with 2 different foundations to support extension. And after these conversations, we have decided that the best alternative is to dissolve the Minnesota 4-H Foundation and move those assets to UMF. And we do that for a number of reasons. One is that it will save money. Instead of having 2 separate boards raising money for extension, it will make us able to be more efficient, and that we will be able to work directly with UMF and our collegiate partners to raise money for both supporting extension programs and 4-H.
Thank you, Dean Durgan, and thank you also. I want to recognize Senior Associate General Counsel Rosalie O'Brien. Do you have anything to add?
No, thank you, Chair McMillan.
All right. Yes, Regent Anderson.
I don't know if we need a motion for this, or is this just review, but I did see that the 4-H Foundation Board of Trustees has approved this.
Yeah. Chair McMillan, Regent Anderson, yes, there was an unanimous vote by the board, Minnesota 4-H Foundation, to support this dissolution.
And Vice Chair Powell and I got a briefing on this this week, just Wednesday, and I would encourage board members to take a hard look at the materials, and both from the legal standpoint and from the business strategy standpoint, this seems to make a lot of sense, but we've got some time here to think about it, and we will act in December. Thank you both. Unless there's other questions I missed from the board, I don't see any other hands. Thank you. And at this point, I would entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So move.
All right, we are adjourned. Very good.